My name is Alex Samonte. I am the Director of Technical Architecture. I'm going to be talking today about the Fortinet Security Fabric. The Fortinet Security Fabric is really about connectivity, both with our own products as well as others. But the main reason we have to look at this is just because the digital attack surface has been expanding. The perimeter is not just a single perimeter. You've got micro perimeters everywhere. You've got rogue APs, you've got BYOD, you've got shadow IT, all new locations where things really need to be protected and segmented. But I can't rely on a single device just to do all of that. So you end up with a lot of different devices. And these are actually all devices that Fortinet has. So we can see across the top we have analytics, SIM, sandbox, all the way down to endpoint clients for deception and user behavior analysis. But the different segments that we cover, from network security, infrastructure, and cloud, again, all different places, but we need to make sure that they all interoperate and talk to each other. It's great that if you have a lot of products that are addressing each of these segments, but if they're all their own little island, you can't benefit from one that sees something to the other. So these are where the customer issues really come up. When they're talking about too much complexity, some of it's our own fault. We've said, hey, you need more than just border security on your network. It certainly served us well, I would say probably from the 90s to the 2000s, but we're way past that now, and there's a lot more things we have to deal with. But to do that, we've added a lot of complexity. We've added more devices, we've added more endpoints, we've added more protection for all of the different gaps that have opened up in our networks that we either didn't realize that we had before or were just new things that have popped up. So we need to be able to control that. For many of these things, in order to do that, if we've had all these devices, we've had to deal with them all ourselves. So I've, either from a manpower point of view or maybe through some manual orchestration on the outside, I've tried to bring all these things together in one form or another just to make my life as a network operator or security operator easier. And not always the case. Clouds have made our lives better, made our lives worse. It really depends on what time of day it is. But the flexibility that you have with putting things in the cloud has enabled a lot more business flexibility. I don't have to necessarily have everything just in my data center. I could have it, let's say, in AWS. And a lot of people thought, well, that'll be fine. I'll choose my cloud. It's like, one customer's going to say, oh, I'll be AWS, I'll be Azure, I'll be Google Cloud Platform. But the reality is a lot of people within each of those networks have made those decisions independently, and you end up with multiple clouds. So now I've got multiple clouds to manage. And again, this kind of goes back to that original complexity piece is, if I have security controls in each of those different clouds, they're all different. They all act like their own separate firewall, and I don't necessarily need my staff to know and understand every single platform. So I want to try and bring that in as much as I can. And then the last piece is, from a measurement point of view, I have all of these security controls. I have security information coming in from a number of different locations. How do I really know that I am secure, or in some cases if I'm compliant? So if I have to rely on PCI, SOX, HIPAA, whichever my industry requires, is there a way I can measure or at least make that job easier? Because if anybody has done any type of compliance within a large organization, it's a long, laborious task, and anything you can do to make your life simpler will help. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of network security. In the early days of security in the 1990s, we had basic either ACLs, non-stateful. We got to a point where we had stateful firewalls that were in there providing a certain amount of connectivity. It wasn't necessarily enough because we were looking at things that were not just on a port and protocol basis, but we had to move to the second generation, which was about the content. We were looking at applications, identifying applications that were running on the protocols that we had, but being able to look a little bit deeper so we could make better, smarter security decisions. With the increase in the amount of infrastructure that we've had to have, we really need all those things to talk to each other, and that's where the security fabric comes in. And I'm going to make a general statement about where I think firewalls and specifically firewalls are going. So if we kind of look at the history from the general connectivity to deeper content to more things, it's all about increased visibility. So it's great that firewalls protect you and have some kind of access control, but the more fine-grained we can have that visibility, the better security decisions we can make. So if in the early 1990s, I could, it wasn't just necessarily about, the outside can't come in and the inside can go out. I want to be able to make smarter security decisions. I did it based on simple networks and ACLs. It wasn't necessarily rocket science, but at the time it was. We were very happy with that. Being able to look at applications and content, the term next generation firewall is an unfortunate one because we're past that next generation firewall. What's after the next generation firewall? Still the next generation firewall. But being able to look down deeper in visibility as far as that content, that's been an increased functionality of the firewalls. And same thing here is to take that visibility, not necessarily just from the firewall itself, but from other devices around it. That's really where the security fabric starts coming together for us. So there's a few things about the security fabric that we want to talk about. The broadness really is that encompasses all of the Fortinet products. So we've done a lot with our integration between all of our products. In the past they had been individually siloed, but what we realized is a huge benefit to having them talk to each other, share security information. Integration. Now, in those cases for the integration with outside vendors, we worked with a lot of service providers, and one of the things they demanded from us on our FortiGate products was a RESTful API, or at least originally just an API. They weren't really specific on that. We had an XML one, a SOAP XML one, but right now we're using the RESTful API for that interface into our products. Now, because we have that, not only could we integrate with a lot of those service providers' homegrown tools, we could integrate with a lot of other third-party providers. And that integration is a key to the security fabric, not just for ourselves, because our own integration utilizes our own APIs, but our integration with a lot of third parties utilizes that same API. The last piece for the automation, and this is where we really want to tie in with outside pieces for orchestration. So in order to, again, make better security decisions or maybe more efficient security decisions, I need to be able to be automated. So either through my own mechanisms for automation or somebody's outside mechanism for automation, we want to make sure that we support all of that. So just to talk about some of the ecosystem, so these are some of our Fabric-ready partners. Now, the Fabric-ready partners are ones that we've worked with, and they have written into our API. And in the case for the security fabric, the important piece is that we are sharing information two ways. And this is my own personal preference about talking about that, because you can share information one way. Logging is a good example of that. A lot of people support exporting logs to other third-party devices. That's great. Those third-party devices can get that information and they can do something about it. But if they did something about it, maybe they want to tell you back, like, oh, by the way, I quarantined this person, or maybe I added an extra tag for them because now their risk score is higher. And that's actually a one-to-one response, but sometimes there's other things. Well, what if that third party that is aggregating all that information gets information from other places, not necessarily from you, but they want to give that to you? So if for example, the mail client saw some phishing attempt that in the body of the email had a URL that they wanted to direct you to go to, maybe that should be added to my web content filter list that the firewall is going to use. So all of these things working together is one of the very big powerful pieces of the security fabric. Now the fabric orchestration on the other side, we're calling these fabric connectors. Now this is where we're writing to other people's APIs. Usually these are well-known services that oftentimes are like software as a service. Sometimes they're big cloud platforms. Sometimes they're software as a service vendors like ServiceNow. So in the case for ServiceNow, we can do integration directly with them, where we can send and directly open tickets with them. They can also send remediation things back to us. So again, that sharing is two ways. So not only can we action towards them, they can action towards us. And this is all done with the power of our APIs and actually their APIs. In this case, for ServiceNow, we're writing to them, and they have some components to write back to us for the actionable response.
So what kind of actions can they send back to you?
So let's say, for an example, the notification that we see is that we see a compromised client. Now, normally, we could take that compromised client, and we'll see this in the demo. Hopefully, we can get to that. We can see that in the demo where we can automatically quarantine that client. But from a company policy point of view, that might not be your workflow. The workflow might have to be that once we receive that notification goes to create a ticket. And that ticket goes up to ServiceNow. Now, within ServiceNow, you might have a workflow that says, okay, this has got to go to the NOC manager and then maybe to the department head of whoever was compromised in that case. So if that's the case, both of those people need to do their response in ServiceNow, and once they've acknowledged what they want to do, and they say, yes, we really want to quarantine that client, that trigger will then come back to us where we can quarantine that client. So for ServiceNow specifically, that is really a lot more of the workflow because the things we can populate into the ticket are great. Everybody can take a look at that, but usually the response from what they want to do comes from a ServiceNow decision, either in the workflow or what response they want to have happen. There are a lot of different ones that can happen, but for the example for the quarantining of the client is a fairly simple one, and one we could have done directly, but because we want to integrate with the outside workflow, that's what we have to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
What about clients that are off-net? Like a laptop goes home for the night, can I still have it under somewhat of a fabric for protection?
Some of it, if there's an endpoint client that supports off-net, so the Fortinet client will support an off-net thing where it will have the same kind of policies that you had while you were on-net in order to make that the case. And if some of those things are either violated or you can't guarantee them, when that client comes back on-net, there is a admission process, so it's got to make sure that your AV is up to date. You don't have anything new or strange. You did an AV scan before you were allowed back on the network. That's something that can work with, say, the Fortinet client. We have a number of other endpoint clients. I'm not sure if they're on this one. I'll take a look. But we have another of endpoint clients that are Fabric-ready partners that have similar controls. So depending on those endpoints, they might have some off-net capabilities, but it really depends on what who the endpoint is and what features they have. But if you wanted to have that on-net, off-net policy, it's something certainly we can support. And if you wanted to automate that in a lot of different ways, again, that can happen through the API.
With respect to that client coming back, is that enforced from a .1x perspective, or is it enforced in the client?
It depends on the implementation. So normally, I would say it's implemented and enforced in the client because that's where you're going to be doing things like process check, AV control, and things like that. But if they don't have, let's say, a client on there, and you're working with either one of our own, we have our own NAC solution, or we work with a number of other third parties. Oh yeah, this one does has those. So we have Forescout on there for NAC, Carbon Black. Zifton's not on there, but there's a few others that are specific for that. And depending on what their workflows are, we can still integrate with that to say, are they allowed in or not? But it really depends on what your overall solution is. And I don't think Yeah, I didn't do the covering up of stuff. So depending on which pieces of the fabric, you don't have to necessarily use all of them or use them in the in the way that we might say, hey, yeah, this was what makes sense. It's what makes sense for the customer. The fabric is really about the flexibility. So if they want that endpoint piece to be doing admission control and not NAC, that's up to them. If they want it the other way around, again, up to them how they want to do it. But the fact that we can talk to all of those things and get that information is what's most important to us. This is for the SD branch, being able to pull that same SD-WAN pieces in, but have that fabric capability. So when Steve talked about the being able to control the Fortinet switch, being able to control the Fortinet AP to have the secure Wi-Fi and secure access, and also the endpoint. Those are all pieces that come into the secure SD branch because we want to be able to secure those things, but also have the interconnectivity between them in order to gain as much information as possible. And that's really where the fabric plays in on that part. Last thing I'll talk about before I jump out of these slides is the cloud pieces. So we have a number of cloud partners that we write our fabric connectors to. So this is where we're writing to their API, both on the private side. So we have got VMware integration, we have KVM Zen, OpenStack, Hyper-V, as well as public cloud integration, and with all of the major public clouds, and we're expanding these lists all the time, both on this one and some of the previous ones. We're adding new Fabric-ready partners all the time to try and increase the amount of coverage that we have. So really, we can extend the visibility and control that we have to the cloud. Same thing for the security. So even though each of these public clouds has their own set of security platforms, they might not do exactly all the same things that that we do feature-wise and functionality. But the nice thing is, if you want to have a consistent policy and control and not have to learn each one for each of the different clouds, you can normalize them all under the FortiGate platform. So this is a environment that we have set up. It's a, I would say, medium-size enterprise. I've built a couple of these dashboards, which I'll go through real quick. This one's security focused, so you can add these widgets on here. It'll tell you what what's going on as far as our sandbox, some of our botnet activity, what's on the client side. Where did my mouse go? Oh, it's over here. Wow. Mouse sensitivity a little high. On the NOC dashboard, this is more of an operations view, resource usage, so I can kind of just see how things are going. Won't spend too much time here, just because a lot of products already have these nice, pretty dashboards. But when we talk about the security fabric, this is a lot of times what people will take a look at. Now, I'm going to zoom in on a couple of these different areas, but first I'm going to point out what we have in this particular architecture is we have a NGFW here at the border. We have an internal segmentation firewall here on the inside, and we have a few levels of internal segmentation for finance, engineering, sales. We have a data center firewall as well. But I'm going to zoom in on each of these things. Now, we can also see that there's a number of endpoints over here on the side, and that's what we're going to take a quick look at. So if we look at, let's see, this is engineering. So some of these things, these ones here in particular, have an endpoint client on there. We can see with the little FortiGate symbol that's on there. Oh yeah, and our favorite Tony Soprano. The ones that are in red happen to be compromised because our FortiGates are looking from a security point of view about what's happening on each of these machines. So we can have a good amount of information for them. If we wanted to, we could take an action. We could quarantine them from here. We're gonna look at that a little bit more in a minute. But some of these devices, let's see, I think this one here. So some of these devices are ones that don't necessarily have clients on there. So there's a lot of IoT that can happen on a network. This happens to be a phone. We have other ones where if somebody has a number of different mobile devices, TVs, a lot of different things that would never, ever be able to have clients on them, but we're able to identify them as to what they are just because we're watching the network traffic. So this is about that visibility that I talked about for firewalls. Some of this visibility can come from the FortiGate itself, doing things like looking at their DHCP requests, looking at their user agent strings because we're doing full SSL inspection. Some of these things can come from the NAC products, so either our own or somebody else's. If they've identified these devices as something or another, we'll take that in because it's useful information to us for us to make a decision. So I know for things like healthcare, if I had a in my hospital, I might have a portable heart monitor or maybe an insulin machine or something like that that I bring in, and it may be network connected. I may not use the cloud, so I have to plug it in. But if I plug it into the network, I only want those things on the network. I don't want somebody to plug in their laptop and get access to the data, but because I know those certain devices are what they are, I can create a policy ahead of time that says only heart monitors or insulin machines can connect into this network. So being able to identify these things is very powerful, and then be able to share that information. So if that information came from NAC, or if it came from our switch, or if it came from the AP itself, we want to make sure that we have that and we can make those kinds of decisions. And it's all about the security fabric that does that. Let me go to the automation piece. So some of these things, when we talked about the ServiceNow, we could do automations from there. In this particular case, we have some built-in automations that can happen with a number of different triggers. But in this case, I have, if there's a compromised host, I'm going to go ahead and add a quarantine to the switch, add a quarantine to the client and add a quarantine to the firewall. We could also do a lot of outside hooks to AWS Lambda or anything that supports a RESTful API. We can send that to there. This is in lieu of maybe people going for the full RESTful API. If they don't have a full DevOps team, they might want to do this level of automation. And actually, yeah, let's jump to some of our applications. And let's look at it over the last hour. Now, some of this is normal NGFW capabilities, being able to look at our applications and things like that. But one of the things that that was interesting about the previous one is we aggregate all of this stuff. So all the different FortiGates that we saw on the previous topology, they're all sharing their information with each other, so they have this global view of everything. So if I were to take a look, I can drill down and see on which FortiGates these might go through, and they might go through multiple ones. So in those cases, we really have to we get a nicer view of a lot of the things. These are just the cloud applications, things that we would require SSL inspection to really look at. So things like Facebook and other applications that were on there. So since we're talking about the Fabric integration, what I'm going to end on is this and the Fabric connectors. But we're able to communicate with our FortiSandbox, and we now can take a look at what kind of files we've submitted. And when files that are malicious that these ones have submitted, these ones will get not only transmitted back to the FortiGate that submitted them, but to the other FortiGates in the Fabric, to the other FortiMails in the Fabric, to the other sandboxes that are in the Fabric, so everybody can take advantage of that shared information. And that's actually one of the most powerful things that we have about the Fabric, is that sharing. And I'm going to end on our Fabric connectors. So these are the Fabric connectors that we have to connect to other outside things, both on the private cloud and the public cloud, ACI, NSX, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, OpenStack, and that list is ever expanding. So we have a number of new things coming up that will we keep adding to the list, both in Fabric Ready partners as well as our connectors.
So so like the compromise side, right?
Uh-huh.
So you're passing that within like that one customer's Fabric.
Correct.
What about to the greater world? Do you have that capability where
so normally, just without the security fabric, our next generation firewalls have the ability to share that into FortiGuard, and then that will come back down. And that's actually comes down, and that's vetted through the security researchers to make sure that happens. When I'm talking about the security fabric, that's almost like a micro threat intelligence that happens immediately just within your fabric. You do have the option to still share that out, but it's going to get vetted before it happens, it gets down to other people. And if you're an organization like, say, either healthcare or government that does not want to share that information, you do not have to share that information.
Can you still take advantage of pulling down?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it depends. Like a lot of governments still want that air gap, so they might pull down the updates via like a outside server and then manually bring it over into the air gap network. But yeah, absolutely, you can still take advantage of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh. Go ahead.
I see you have the NSX connector. So does that mean you have a VM that does network introspection with NSX?
Correct.
Okay.
So we have NSX integration. We just announced NSXT integration. So both of those are ways that we can work with VMware in order to exchange that security information, both in the security groups, but as well as being a security node for the different workloads.